You left my set. Sorry.
Bo 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 bo.
While you're sitting up, can I ask you a question?
Yeah, sure.
How exactly did we get from Shem Lam Shem Ma to the highest being wrote to the shoe? I somehow missed this transition.
What is the question? How did we get from Shem Ban, Shem Ma to Rot of Vishu? The Chayis of Rot of Vishu. Okay.
Save yourself when you're hearing you save yourself.
I feel intelligent, Baruch. I was able to repeat your question.
Wow.
Just a point, a couple points. And then you go to comments, you got it. When I talk to the boss, that's when I really got it. When you talk to them. You would every month or so. Get a deeper understanding. What time is it? 8 o'clock, right?
It is 8:15.
Oh, 8:15.
Only one M. Danny, only one M?
I want both. One and Danny with one and yeah.
Economics.
That's my work, so I want to get it at both.
Bark, we're all over here nice and cozy.
Is my question inappropriate, or are you just waiting until we start recording to answer?
No, I'm trying to focus in.
He's doing research on your question.
And, the principle Achayis Not of Shub, how it relates to the general topic here, is still due to be explained. We started talking about this Nohar Yetzim Meyedem. We are completing the explanation of the Pasuk. So we explained the inyan from the Rochecha Dachinayim, and then we went to talk about Nisivos Secho Sholim. What are these Nisivos? Nisivos.
What about translating the pasuk?
Huh?
What about can you translate the pasuk just once?
I've translated 10 times. The Rochecha Dachinayim, its path, its passages, its roadways are paths of pleasantness, and its passages, its alleyways are peace. So so he said that this Nesivesecho Sholem, since it comes in the pasuk after the Rochecha Dachinayim, it must be that the Nesivo is refers to a higher madrega than the inyan from the Rochecha Dachinayim. Even though that derech means a broad public roadway, whereas Nesiv is a narrow passage, as we discussed then. Yet it must be that Nesiv refers to a higher madrega. So ultimately the Rebbe comes and says that the Nesiv refers to this Nohar, Hayetzim Eden Hashkesh es Hagan, the river that comes from Eden to water the Gan. The that refers to the Gil in Gan Eden. And the Siva Iseho Sholem, that refers to the Nohor that feeds the Gan itself, which is a higher in. And then he goes on to explain this principle. And in explaining this principle, he started a new union, HaChayes Rotzev V'Shuv, to explain the whole phenomenon of Chayes Eliki coming into the world. But the Chayes is Rotzev V'Shuv. How that translates in the Mirurim and all that, that is still remains to be seen.
So we don't know yet how any of this relates. This Nahar.
How indirectly, right. What is the principle? Yes, that will still remains to be seen. All right, in that case, you know what, let us start from the top of the page and we will go into the whole thing. We had to interrupt in the middle. Top of the page with Beis. We first have to discuss what the Pasuk says, V'achayos rotzev v'shuv. We mentioned the other day that this Pasuk is actually in Vush Cheskel, that the Chayes HaKedesh, rotzev v'shuv, are in constant movement, running forth and retreating. And Chassidus points out that the Chayes also V'Shuv refers to also the Chayes Eliki as it comes down Milmaila. The Ha'oir V'Chayes Eliki Shenim Shachlahachis Ha'elameis. That the Chayes Eliki that comes to give life to the world, Hu Bivchinas Rotzev V'Shuv, has this element. The manner in which the Chayes comes is in this manner of Rotzev V'Shuv. Rotzev means it runs forth, which means it comes out from its source and runs out. And V'Shuv is that it reverts back to the source. What does this mean? So to understand it, we're going to the inyan of Chayes HaNefesh. Ukmei Chayes HaNefesh. And this is similar to the way it is in Chayes HaNefesh. Chayes of the Nefesh, L'rach, is HaGuf. The Chayes HaNefesh that comes to give life to the body. Hu Talmid Merotzev V'Shuv. So that Chayus is constantly Berotzev V'Shuv in an activity of Rotzu, of coming forth, and V'Shuv and reverting back. The Rotzev V'Shuv can also be, he said, defined as Histalkus v'Hispashtus. Histalkus means that the Chayus withdraws and goes back to its source. His pashtus is when it comes forth and relates to the guf. The hu inyan the fiko de liba, and this is what's represented by the fiko de liba, by the pulse in the heart, the Beis noise, which has these two movements, in and out, in and out. What's the significance of this union? That there is an in and out. He says like this: Im yeh b'bechinas hispashtus levad. If this chayas would be only have only one direction, hispashtus, spreading forth and coming forth and relating to the body, lo yeh hachayas, then that would not constitute, would not give the element of chayas to the guf. Kiyim tzorich liyas, except on the kiyim only, it must be tzorich liyas. It has to be his talkus with his pashtus. It has to be reverting back, and then his pashtus again. And this has to be a constant relationship between the oil that's mispashit and that it has to be nistalik back to its source. Kash and nistalik v'yoyle ben koiroi. What happens then when it's nistalik, when it reverts, and the oil in koiroi, when it's withdrawn and it rises back to its source, mischades hachayus bozeh. Then the chayus is rejuvenated with this reversion. And then when it transfers forth, nimshach chayus chodesh lahachayos. So then the new chayus is drawn from the nefesh lahachayos to give life to the guf. So we discussed this on Friday. We discussed it on a lower level, on the level of seichel, to get a handle and to understand what this is about. So we said that in seichel also there is this inyan of rotze v'shuv, of his talkus with his pashtus. Which is demonstrated in the experience of in learning bichlal. That when a person learns, let's say, in the most obvious case is where a person learns something for a second time, a review. And so in a review situation, if he would be merely reviewing that which he already learned, then not only will it not add anything, will not bring anything new into his understanding, but he will not even have the experience of learning. Because the experience of learning is to sense the essence of the seichel, not just to know the technicalities of the seichel.
The what? Technicality. The technicality.
It is to know the essence of the seichel. The essence of the seichel is not seichel at all. There's a source for the seichel. Seichel is the reality behind seichel is the rotzen hanefesh, and the reality behind the rotzen hanefesh is the oinek. The reality behind the oinek is the nefesh itself, and the reality behind nefesh is the creator, is the Eireleki. So the principle that you understand something, there has to be the sense how that understanding is related to the source of seichel, to the basis of seichel. If it becomes merely a metzius, then it lacks the whole principle of seichel, and you were just talking about about a Metzias, not seichel, not living seichel that has chayes. Let's take this a step further. Chassidus explains that in terms of the effect of seichel, seichel is supposed to give a person guidance, and ultimately seichel is supposed to translate in midos, and midos translate in machshava dibur u'maisa. That transition from seichel into midos, from midos into machshava dibur u'maisa, it can happen in generally speaking, in two distinct manners. One is what's called an chitzonis decay effect. That's referred to as the bechein. And the other is where it is a direct effect. What is the bechein? The bechein is like this. A person learns something, and he found out a certain reality, a certain truth. This is what the Rebbeinu wants. This is the right thing to do. The fact that the Rebbeinu wants, the fact that this is the right thing to do, does not really, so to speak, reverberate in the seichel. He does not really sense its significance. Except he knows that is what it is because it's on the Shulchan Aruch. But what is the significance of that the Rebbe still wants it, and that this is the right thing to do? He doesn't sense its significance. Therefore, in order for that seichel to follow through on the next step and the next step and the next step, there has to be a distinct effort where he says, okay, therefore, we are going to be, this is what we have to do in the next step, the next stage. In other words, the next stage, the midos are not created by the seichel. The midos are created directly, but they're created because of the conclusion, because of the knowledge in the seichel. The seichel then does not illuminate, does not give chayas to the midos. The midos are standalone entities. This is how you're supposed to feel, this is how you're supposed to act, and so forth. There is no chayas. The inyan to be chayas hanefesh is lacking. Then there is another, as I said, a completely different scenario, where the seichel is a living seichel, which means the seichel is not just a point of knowledge. The seichel is something that one senses that this is his nefesh, this is the reality with which he lives. This seichel emanates from the reality of his own nefesh. And therefore the seichel simply identifies how the nefesh translates its presence in the world. So then, the midas come more or less automatically, because the midas reflect this truth of the nefesh. And then everything, the midas and machshava dibur u'maisa, are imbued with the chayes hanefesh. Thus, when we say that when one learns seichel, there is a phenomenal difference between when the seichel has the chayas, when he really sees the seichel from its inception, or he is merely repeating what the facts are, what on the chitzonic level, on the seichel level, on the logical level. The proper way of learning seichel, this is the chayas rotze v'shuv, that no matter how many times he learns and reviews and repeats the same seichel, each time he rises back up to the essence and to the source of the seichel, so that each time he again re-experiences understanding the seichel. That way, we can readily see that there is it has a very broad and deep effect. Number one, it's a new experience of the same seichel, and therefore and since it's a second time, therefore he goes deeper than the first time, because he's coming already from a different stage, and the effect of it is a direct chayus, enlivening, and encouragement, and giving chayus to his midas and to machshava dibur u'ma'is. So this is a principle, chayus rotzu v'shuv, even at this lowest level of practical seichel. The chayus rotzu, the seichel comes forth. You understood. Then the seichel goes back to its source, and then you realize how this seichel actually is rooted in the rotzen hanefesh. And then when he reviews it again, he goes back to the source and draws it from its source. The same is true regarding the chayes hanefesh, as the nefesh gives chayes to the guf. Here too, in our day and age, we have a very clear grasping, a very clear demonstration of this principle. There are today two distinct ways that the chayes haguf is interpreted. We have how this is viewed from the secular viewpoint, that the nefesh, whatever nefesh, the chayes that's in the guf belongs to the guf, and it all functions within on the guf level completely. Anything that the guf senses, it's because the guf senses it. It's on a physical experience. Whether it is sensing a dover gashmi, a rough thing, whether it's sensing a finer gashmi, or even if it's sensing midas, if it's sensing a seichel. It's all on the guf level, on the physical. And then, of course, we reject that view completely. And it's important to understand that the chayes in the guf is something which is drawn from the nefesh all the time. And in order that there should be a nefesh element in the chayes in the guf, step back a moment. In order that the chayes that's in the guf should have a chayus element, it should not become guf, part of guf. It should, when it would lose the chayus element, it would just have the effect on the guf effect. But it would actually have a chayus element. It has to revert back to nefesh all the time. And this is really a phenomenal thing, because on the one hand, nefesh and guf are very, very distinct. The guf cannot understand nefesh, and nefesh cannot understand guf. What comes from nefesh and the guf is a very, what's called mitzumtzum dik, a very limited element. The nefesh enables the guf, the hand, to move. It's a physical movement. This movement has a physicality to it, and it also has a nefesh element into it. Like we say, when a person explains a seichel, the hand moves automatically. Why? Because it's imbued with the chayes hanefesh. So that movement has a nefesh element. It is not merely a physical movement. And yet, It has to be translated on a physical level, otherwise it will not happen in the guf. But this physical element that the guf has the ability to move the hand is constantly rejuvenated from the nefesh. In other words, yes, there is chayes, there's a koyach in the guf to move the hand. But it is entirely correct, not only it's entirely correct, this is the correct way to say that it's the rotzen ha-nefesh that makes the hand move. Not the chayes that's in the hand. What motivates it? What gives it the chayes to move? Not the chayes in the hands. And the hand is the last ring, so to speak, the last rung level where the movement actually takes place on the physical level. But the enticement and the chayes behind it is the nefesh itself. But the nefesh itself is very superior to the guf. And therefore it has to produce a chayes that can relate to the guf. It produces a chayes that can relate to the guf, but at the moment when it's first produced, there is still the nefesh element in it. A moment later, it loses it. It has to go back and be rejuvenated from the nefesh.
And if it doesn't go back?
Even then it's no chayes.
No chayes at all, or it's chayes aguf?
Then that's right. There's chayes haguf, but that's not called chayes. Just saying the gashmi is not chayes.
But there's such a mitzvah, chayes aguf,
without there's no mitzvah without being connected to the nefesh, but there's a mitzvah where it's connected to the nefesh is not recognizable, it's not obvious. It's called kistu de chiyusa.
What does that mean?
That's a trace of chayes. And if there is no connection to the nefesh altogether, then there's no chayes. What?
This is the equivalent of a dry seichel.
In a moshel, this is like a dry seichel. In our moshel.
Why is the connection to the seichel lost? It initiated, take the movement of the hand. It started out with inspiration from the seichel, and then we said it kind of gets lost.
We have Mesholim galore, and the one thing that came to mind now is in all aspects, all human aspects. We said, what is a car? What makes a human being invent a car? To provide a human function, to move, because the human being perceives the world as his platform.
Right.
And therefore he has to be able to move from one place to the other. Right. And the easier it is, the more human it is.
Mm-hmm.
The more conforming this to the human desire to move around the world.
Okay.
And we create superior cars. And the more superior cars they are, the more we lose the initial chayes, the initial point of why they were created. To the point where at the best cars, what do we do with them? We go in circles, going racing around, lose completely the sense of the human, what the human element is.
So this demonstrates this purpose. The purpose gets lost, but why would that be? I mean, it started out with the correct intent, whether it's designing the car or making a movement. Why does it? The purpose gets lost. The purpose is really the best quality.
You know, that's a beautiful question. Okay, really, it is out of context for me here, but you know.
What was the so beautiful question?
All right, let the beautiful mouth say it.
Why we start out with a car which was designed for real human purpose, and we land up racing around in circles. The real intention is there. Why should it Why should it become lost or diminished?
Seichel, as we know, consists, in general, all the kochas HaNefesh consist of three categories, right? Chabad, Chagas, and Mehi. Within Chabad itself, which is the general Seichel, there's one element in Chabad that stands out in a category by itself, and that's called Chochmah. What is special about Chochmah? So the Rebbe explains Chochmah is in Habitul and so forth. What is Chochmah provide? What is special about Chochmah that the others receive from Chochmah if they are imbued with the Oyer HaChochmah? The special meaning of Chochmah is that Chochmah does not require a personal experience of the Seichel that I'm learning. My personal experience does not substantiate the Seichel. What substantiates the Seichel is the fact that it is the truth, the source from where it's coming from. That's Chochmah. All other levels, even in Seichel, seek to have a self-substantiation of the Seichel. I should understand it. I should have a personal proof of it and so forth. On the Seichel level. Chochmah does not require a personal proof. Chochmah relates to the fact that that the truth tells him this, the emes tells him this, and that's sufficient Chochmah. That's why Chochmah has this phenomenal thing. It brings the real perception of the truth in Seichel. To Seichel. But so this is the quality of Chochmah. Beyond that, below that, there is a tendency to grab the Seichel and to become independent. And this is why it is necessary, it's a special instruction, that we have to make sure that the Bina continues to have its relationship to the Chochmah. You must always remember, where did you get that initial insight from the Chochmah? But because we are in Gashmi, we are in a physical world. Hagshama is a very central element in our.
What was the word?
Hagshama, Geshem,
Akshama.
is a very central element.
Physicality, making something more physical.
And if you want to take it just a little further, it's something new, but just a little further, so to speak, in the human experience, that which I have in my chokhmah, I cannot show anybody. I cannot really make a name for myself because I have my chokhmah. But that which I can produce in a hagshama level, that gives me a place in the world. With this, I can get my diploma and get 3 letters behind my name. So that becomes central. This is not, this extends itself in many things. Yes, it is an Nisayon. It is definitely an Nisayon. And the Nisayon is to remember that the principle of Seichel is that which you understand in the Chochmah, not which becomes we discussed it so many times from different angles. Everything is upside down completely.
At some point,
I know a doctor, and I'm sure you know of 10 doctors of that kind, who went through school and had good marks, had no idea of what he is studying. And when he was in residency or as a apprentice, or the practicing, he was He was under doctor's supervision, and he prescribed various things. So the doctor said to him, "Do you realize you almost killed your patient?" It meant he was completely oblivious of it. But if they give him a test, he knows it all.
So at some point there's a shuv. I mean, at some point the Bina senses.
Rabbi Dvorkin, you know the old Dvorkin? No, Rabbi Dvorkin also, Zalman Shimon Dvorkin. He was in the hospital, he was not well. He had to go through an operation and all that. So he said to me that there was this surgeon who did the operation, a very expert surgeon. So he says, the surgeon says to me, "I am a plumber. The real doctor is the diagnostician. He is a real doctor." The diagnostician, the one who makes the diagnosis, who understands, he knows what's going on. I know the plumbing job very well, says, but I'm a plumber relative to him.
Made it feel good. They get more money.
Huh?
Made it feel real good.
Well, no, he didn't mind. As long as the plumber knows that he's only a plumber, and the real doctor then he's okay. Then he's a wise doctor, a wise plumber.
Isn't the surgeon supposed to? Isn't the surgeon supposed to diagnose
No.
when he operates?
He's following through on
Somewhat.
what was
No.
told to be done.
Some doctors do. Some doctors diagnose and do the procedure also.
Okay, so now let's diagnose the doctors. Yeah. Okay, so all this is to understand that the reality of the world as tangible and quote unquote real it appears to us, this whole reality is real only if you perceive that there is a highest, that they represent something. It means something. We have our mashal of the clock on the wall. Everybody in our class heard this mashal. You go into somebody's home and there's a clock on the wall. What do you see, a clock or you see a living home? You see a living home because there's a human being and it's a human home and therefore there's a clock. If you say that what that is, it's a clock. A clock, it makes no difference whether it's on the wall or it's in the store, it makes no difference, it's the same clock. And that phenomenon, this is what's called Rotzer V'Shuv. On the one hand, it's physical, so you see the clock. On the other hand, you step back and you say, hey, but this is a human dwelling. It's not just a physical wall or a physical clock.
The Ratzo is seeing the physical and the Shuv is seeing it's not just a wall, a clock and all that. Which one is it?
Shuv is what goes back to the source.
Shuv is not seeing just a physical clock.
That's right. So this is the principle that the highest has to go back and then it gets rejuvenated. In other words, even though, again I'm repeating this, but it's the highest has to be at the lowest level. It has to be able to relate to Ha'achisis Aguf, Ha'achisis Oilams. But it can never be exclusively world. There has to be always a sense that where does this highest come from? Why is it here? Because of its source. And the minute it leaves the source and becomes imbued in the world, becomes very worldly. It has to go back and be rejuvenated. Okay.
So this going back. You say the minute it becomes worldly, it has to go back. This is automatic. It can't become disconnected.
Well, that's true, except once it gets into our hands, we have we have capacity to disconnect it. We are our own bosses, and that is why we need training. We have to know that we have to have beetle, we have to have avoider, and so forth. Essentially, this is what Klippa is all about. What Klippa claims the Metzias to be at this level. One of the ways that the Pare is being in Tanakh, but Pare is being titled for his evil, is Yankee being a blessed Pare that whenever he comes to the river will rise towards him. And he quickly forgot about that part of it and just promoted the fact that the river rises towards him.
So if this is the case, if it's us that's doing this disconnect, are we saying so it is we who make the klipa?
We are the greatest resource for klipa. We can also be. Our job is to do the opposite. You know, because of the kedusha that is in us, we are the greatest resource. We Chas v'Shalom give a lot of chayes to the klipa. Okay, that's it. Okay, so we are 6 lines from the top. The line begins bozeh u'chemispashet nimshech chayes chodos lahachayos. When it is mispashet, a new chayes is drawn lahachayos, to effect life, to give life. Because in order to give life, it has to be a living chayes. It has to be a chayes that carries with it the element of the source. So likewise, the oir eliki into the world, who tamid bebchinas ratzu v'shuv, is constantly in this state of ratzu v'shuv, running forth. Then he wants to give chayes, and then also at the same time there's the shuv, so go back to the source. I mentioned several times an episode that the Belzer Rebbe was asked why he doesn't send emissaries out into the world to bring Eden to Yiddishkeit. He said he's afraid that the emissaries would be influenced and would get lost. So they said, but the Lubavitcher is doing it. So he said, Lubavitcher, whatever they are, they're in 770. That was a wise insight. Here's another clear example of Chayes Rotzer V'Shuv. If a shliach loses connection with 770, then he loses his effect as a shliach. He has to do his work over there as a shliach. And you think he gets involved in all kinds of different things at his level, with half Jews, Rahman Islam, with all kinds of different things. And but at the same time, he knows where he belongs to. And if he loses sense where he really belongs, then he loses the highest, the effect of his shlichus.
Shlichut.
Shlichut.
So oil ki is to beginnes also beshuv k'mishukosu, as the pasuk says, "L'man is amercha choved v'lo yidon." Everybody's familiar with this pasuk. We say it every day in davening. "L'man is amercha choved." In order that is amercha choved, that you should be, we should give you a zemer, sing to you, praise you, choved with glory, v'lo yidoim. And it should never cease to pronounce the covenant. Yidam means to be quiet. Lo yidam should never cease to pronounce the covenant. And the Zohar says this in Nehoira Tatoi Kori Todir. Nehoira Tato means the lower light. Kori Todir is arousing. Kori is referring, arousing Todir constantly, kuli. But says afterwards, that the lower light is constantly arousing the upper light. What is this about? The Bechinas Malchus, it is essentially the Inyan, that Malchus, which is called the Tatoi, this is the lower light. He told me the Bechinas Rotzu is always and constantly in a Rotzu state. That it is constantly referring back to Keser actually. Malchus is rooted in Keser. And in order that Malchus should affect the Malchus element, it has to always revert back to the Keser. In this case, one second, Baruch, one second. Baruch, 1 second. In this case, the Rotzu B'Shuv is in reverse. View this from a reverse angle. Rotzu is when it runs back to its source, and Shuv is when it comes back to be a Metzius. But in any case, it is a constant state of Rotzu B'Shuv, a constant state of rejuvenation, of coming back, of going back to the source, and it's Kori Todir. It is constantly, all the time, arousing its source. To rejuvenate the Inyan HaMalchus. So, to discuss in detail the Inyan from Malchus and Keser and so, this is not the place. Just to explain the Inyan, but it says over here that this also B'Shuv is similar to the Inyan from the Malchus is Koritodim, because Malchus is that level that goes out to world. So on the one hand, it goes out to world. On the other hand, it is in a constant state of Bitul L'mayla. It says that the highest level of Bitul is in the Malchus. The Melech Vayidin. On the one hand, he was a Melech, and he was running his Malchus in full force, in full glory, to the extent that he would not tolerate any spackling, any element of lack of beetle, Malchus cannot tolerate. Immediately, this is what a melech is. This is and at the same time, he himself is in total beetle. As it says that when it comes to tefillah, to davening, so everyone there's the kriyas and ishtachavoyas in davening that everybody has to kneel and bow, but you kneel and bow and straighten out. When it comes and say the same Hashem, you have to straighten out because there's a limit. You kneel and bow and then you have to straighten out. And this is for everybody except for the melech. Melech kiven shekora shuv and yizekif. And the melech, the way he would daven, the minute he bowed the first time, he remains in a bound state throughout the whole Shemoneh Esrei. In Ezekah. And the reason for that is because that is the type of beetle that the Melech has. He's not a separate entity from the beetle. He and the Lakus is one thing. It's completely, and once he's about, he doesn't have to, he can't straighten out. He is there in the Lakus. And the interesting thing is that the halacha is that in Beis HaMikdash, in the Azara, there's only standing. There's standing room only. You're not allowed to sit in the Azara. The Kohanim always worked entirely on the standing, when the Kohen Gadol could never sit down. There was no such thing as sitting there. The Sanhedrin, he has to sit. There was outside of the Kodesh. It was in a Mokim Choil, except for Melech, except for the Melech. Malchus, Beis David, they sat in the Azar, because the Melech, he is one thing with his beetle is so thorough and complete, like a Malchus level. Okay.
Ratzah here is going back to, in other words, Ratzah by Nadav and Avihu was like going out of the world. That's the same thing with here. Malchus is trying to go back to.
Right. The Ratzah over here means the opposite. Not the Ratzah, the Chai is coming down, but rising up.
So there's actually two whole separate systems.
Concepts.
One, the highest from above, and us is Midraim.
Right.
It's exactly like a mirror image. It's reversed. Which is Ratzah, which
Right.
is Shai.
Right. Okay. For another time. In Malchus, it reverses itself. Malchus, it reverses itself because Malchus is inherently in a beetle, and therefore, if Malchus has the Rotzu to come out into the world, then it completely becomes a Metzias. The Rotzu in Malchus is going up.
But in Seichel it remains Shuv is Lamakor.
Right. No. In Seichel, that's right. Shuv is Malchus.
Say Malchus in the greater state of Bittul when it's in
Then the Chochmah, right.
When it's in the world.
Right. Malchus in greater state of Bittul than Chochmah. Malchus is a reflection of Kesed directly.
But when it's in the world, it's in a greater state of Bittul than when it's based off of when it's going out.
When it's a Ratzah, it's a
Shuv is. You're saying Shuv is Bittul.
The truth is like this. In Malchus, this Kori Todir, this Rotzu, is not a state of beetle. In other words, Malchus really is a steady, is a constant presence. But Kori Todir, he's constantly arousing the source, the kesef. But not that he reverts back. Malchus is a constant, because because his beetle here and beetle Lamaila is exactly identical. Not great. It's exactly identical. So but the quality told that he is constantly arousing the kesef. Okay, this is going further. Boaz Spherois. The 10 spheres. This is continuing with this Achayis also B'Shul. As spherois nimshalim b'Sefer Yitzira, they are likened in Sefer Yitzira l'shalhev as hakshura b'gachelos. They're likened to a flame that is connected to gachelos, to the coal. Uksiv, and the Pasuk says, Ki avai elekecho eish oich lohu, that the Elokus, so avai is eish eichlo, is a consuming flame. Kmei ha'eish she'ei letomid l'maylo.
But on the other hand, it's constantly being held by the substance, by the coal. It's just both movements at once. It's constantly leaping upward, but it's being held down by the coal that it's embedded
in. The muscle of the coal has to be reversed when you talk about Avaya Lekecho Eishechlo. Most of the call is that the flame can only exist while it is connected to the coal. If the shalheves should be dissociated from the gacheles, there will be no shalheves. So the similar linya, that the eish is constantly connected to its source, and should it lose its connection to the source, it would lose its mitzvahs. That's the moshel of Shalheves Akshura B'Gacheres. V'chein b'sheira sh'mokir ha'oir. This is also true in Sheira Shemokir Ha'oir. When we talk about the source of oir, Isa b'Sefer Yitzira, so it says in Sefer Yitzira, that the dibur as it comes milmaylo is berotze v'shuv. What is the pshat? Pirush. Udvore hu bechinas malchus. Dibur is the union from malchus the insoy baruch. How the malchus speaks about the ha'eser spheres. Speaks about the ha'eser spheres. The bechinas rotze v'shuv. Okay. Maybe we'll come back after we explain it. We'll come back to this. In any case, the thing that brings down from Sefer Yitzira, that the Mokir Ha'oir is this is Dinya HaMalchus, and that also is in a Rotzer V'Shuv manner. V'hinei si bas harotzu, coming closer to this. Si bas harotzu, the cause for this rotzu, yuvam behagdem inyan oirin soif. Be able to understand what brings the rotzu into the oil. First, we have to discuss the principle of oil ein soif. What is the principle that we need to focus in? Ma shenikro ein soif, v'loi ein lo tchilo. The fact that we refer to oil ein soif as ein soif and not ein lo tchilo. If this oil represents the Inyan Holocaust, the Inyan Holocaust in truth is ein lo tchilo. Shuhu mailo gdela yeseh. Ein lo tchilo is a greater mailo than ein soif.
Isn't the tchila kind of sof? In other words, there's a boundary. Either way, it's a sof. A sof at one end or a sof at the other end.
Ein lo tchilo.
But when we say ein sof, I mean if you look this way, you say okay, there's no sof. But if you look the other way, there'd also be no sof.
No, ein lo sof. Ein sof means that yesh lo tchilo, but ein lo sof doesn't mean ein sof. Ein lo tchilo is a greater mailo than ein lo sof. שזה מעל דלה יסף, משקוסם פלא הודימין. And it says in Pelo Hodimin, a very simple principle. The whole kadmoi nitzchi, v'lei kol nitzchi kadmoi. What does this mean? Ein lo tchila means it has no beginning. Has no beginning means what? Means that this is something which is always true. Doesn't have a beginning. This is called kadmoin. The principle of kadmoin means that there is nothing preceding it. Not that it came from some other source. Nothing preceding it. This precedes everything. So in verses kadmon, this is ein lo tchila, versus ein lo sof. Ein lo sof means it has no end. Means it will never end, either in terms of mokim or zman. There is no end to its continued existence, and there's no end as to where it can reach. This means ein lo sof. So it says in very simple terms, kadmon is by definition nitzchi. Kol kadmon nitzchi. Anything that is kadmon, which means ein lo tchila, is by definition nitzchi, eternal. V'loi kol nitzchi kadmon, but not necessarily is the reverse true. There could be something that is nitzchi, but and yet it will not be kadmon, which is in itself requires an understanding. How can it be, if it's not a kadmon, how can it be nitzchi? Okay, ready for a real pure haskalah?
This is to explain how the Ratzah got into the oil.
No questions now. Kol kadmon nitzchi v'lei kol nitzchi kadmon. How can it be that something that is not kadmon and it should be nitzchi? In other words, it was created. It was created means it has a specific creation, has specific presence. If it's specific presence, therefore it has by definition a limit, and therefore it's not nitzchi. So the Pelo Hodimin says no. Lei kol nitzchi kadmon. It's possible that something will be a nitzchi, and yet it's not a kadmon. Kadmon is by definition nitzchi.
mean something was always there. That was not.
Avram, I said no
No,
questions.
That's not. I just want to clarify what it means. What does it mean? The term
Kadmon. Kadmon means, but there's nothing preceding it.
Primal.
Kadmon means it's
Is that
nothing
the
preceding.
same as saying it was always there?
If nothing preceded it.
Doesn't make it very much.
Are you trying to understand that which cannot be understood? That's why I said no questions. Kadmon means there's nothing preceding it. That's the best we can say about it. They call Nitzki Kadmon, but a Nitzki is not necessarily a Kadmon, which means that something that came into being, and yet it could be a Nitzki. How was that? Shagam benivroim, which means to say that among nivroim too, or in the level of nivroim, in this context, anything that's not kadmon is a nivra, no matter what the level is. Anything that's not kadmon is a nivra. Because what's made nivra? Something preceded it before it came into being. There was a time that it wasn't. Therefore, it's a nivra. Whether it's a nivra or eir b'keli, or it's not eir b'keli, just eir, whatever it is, something preceded it where it wasn't there, but it wasn't. And something preceded it. In other words, wasn't is not even a correct word. Something preceded it in order for this to emanate. That's already not a kadmon. And Nivroim could be a Nitzchi. גם אם יש עניין נצחי, שכיומים בייש או במין. That we see that Nivroim, had the Rebbe created Nivroim, there are Nivroim, kayomim beish, that they have a kiyum, they have a subsistence, they have a continued existence. Beish. Beish means each, as an entity. There are Nivroim that are kayomim beish, like we always give the marshal of the sun, or the stars, kayomim beish, or the moon. The very same that was created in Sheshes Mebreshis, without any diminishing force, without any change, continues to exist and give off and give off its power. And then there are Nivroim that kayomim b'min. What's kayomim b'min? Kayomim b'min means they have this power of indefinite existence,
The individual.
but not as an individual. Only b'min, only the kind, the species. The individual has the power, the existence of b'min, not the individual, not b'ish. Hagam shehem hevim v'nivroyim, that although that they are existences ahavim, they came into being, v'nivroyim, they were creations, memei lahem nifsodim mitzad, and yet, therefore, since that they are having nivroyim, therefore mitzad atzmam, in and of themselves, they have a limited presence, and therefore nifsodim, they on their own, from their own nature, from their own power, nifsodim, they should dissipate. And yet they continue to exist indefinitely because of the will of the Creator that has created them. Okay, here's where we have to stop because of the time.
I mean, how do we know? There's a concept.
So have a good day.
How can we say we observe they appear to be mitzvah, but we never see them disappear? But who says they won't disappear sometime in the future?
Yeah. Baruch is coming. Here. Even from them to continue to exist unaltered is a koyach nitzchi.
Yeah, I mean the fact that they shouldn't, if they weren't being forced to exist, they would be instantly to nothingness.
And yet the very same continues to exist.
I'm sorry?
The very same thing continues to
Because
exist.
it's being made to exist.
It's not kayom. That has to be understood. If it gets recreated again, it's not kayom v'yish. Kayom v'yish means that he has an individual presence. And so Barotzen Habeir, that we still have to elaborate on this. Barotzen Habeir. Because if it's Barotzen Habeir, then it's not kayom v'yish.
We don't experience an stalkos. We don't experience a stalkos at all. We don't sense this. You said it's like breathing, right? It's the highest in our body.
There's no way that in one session we're going to understand it. Right. Okay, so.
Yeah,
Well, it is very simple. At the heart first, he's constant.
You don't record yourself. I noticed the other day. I shined the camera on you and it didn't show up in the film.
Oh,